Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lucinda Vakura, the Senior Director of Business Development and Marketing with the Alford Group. And the title of today's webinar is America's Transfer of Wealth, Why You Should Act Now. Before we dive in, I want to tell you a little bit about the Alford Group and walk you through some housekeeping items. So I realize that many of you and maybe most of you are familiar with the Alford Group and what we do, but for those of you who may not be, the Alford Group is a national full-service equity-forward consulting firm, and we specialize in the nonprofit and social sectors. We provide services in things like fundraising, strategic planning, data analytics, diversity, equity, inclusion, interim staffing, and much more. Really, our goal is to provide the tools and the structure to empower organizations to have the greatest impact possible. We are proud to be a member and sponsor of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. We are a proud certified women's business enterprise, and we're also a member of the Giving Institute. You can find out more about the Alford Group at our website, which is alford.com. So just a few housekeeping items before I turn things over to Karen. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will have a copy of the full recording of the webinar available for you all. You'll receive an email later today after the event with the full recording and a link to a survey. The survey is very short. It's about 4 questions, and we encourage you to take the survey. It's just telling us how we did today, and we would really love your feedback. Once this event is concluded, you'll also be prompted to take the survey in your web browser, and we hope that, that you do so. Everyone today is in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. You can ask questions anytime. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. If you mouse over the bottom, there's a Q&A icon. That'll open a window and you can type your questions there. Also, the chat is open and you can chat reactions or comments at any time throughout the webinar, and we encourage everyone to interact with that feature as well. Finally, we invite you to join us on Twitter. We will be live tweeting throughout the event, and we invite you to join the conversation there as well. So with that, I'm really excited to turn things over to our moderator of today's event, Karen Rotko-Wynn, who's going to walk us through the agenda and kick us off.
Well, thank you, Lucinda. It's great to be here with all of you virtually. And I'm just going to review with you how we're going to approach our webinar this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. We're going to be providing you with an overview of the transfer of wealth. We have an expert panel with us today. We're going to allow some time for Q&A at the end, and then we will wrap up the presentation. We will be doing all of this in the next 60 minutes. So now I am very pleased to ask our panel to join us here. I want to just set this up briefly for all of you. Many of you attended our Giving USA presentation last summer, where we reported upon the data on charitable giving in the United States in the year 2020. Everyone in the sector celebrated the all-time high in charitable giving of $471.44 billion donated to nonprofits in 2020. One component that really stood out for us was the data around bequest giving. One of our panelists today, Robin, presented some amazing information about the transfer of wealth, and in fact, it did inspire this webinar today. One of the statistics that came out of the giving data was that giving by bequest accounted for $42 billion in 2020, which was 9% of all gifts made last year and a 10% increase in current dollars over the previous year. Some key takeaways include the estimated bequest giving from estates of $5 million and above was about $22 billion. Bequest giving from estates between $1 and $5 million amounted to about $8.6 billion. And here's the one that really jumped out at us. Estimated bequest giving from estates with assets below $1 million amounted to $11.2 billion. When we saw this data last year, we said, if you haven't started a planned giving program, this is the time to do it. So we're going to dive into a lot more than that today. We want to take this to a deeper level and learn about what is the transfer of wealth? What is it going to really look like over the next 10 years? And how will organizations best utilize this information to strengthen your planned giving efforts? So I'm so pleased to introduce this awesome panel today, starting with Travis Green, who is Vice President at LOCUS Impact Investing, where he helps foundations and nonprofits build local impact investing programs to reinvest endowed dollars back into communities and do things like build housing, lend to small businesses, and increase food access. Travis is currently facilitating impact investing cohorts in Kansas and Indiana, and at a national learning circle of community foundations. I know we have a lot of friends from community foundations on the call today. Travis has been using or facilitating transfer of wealth analyses for 8 years. Next, we have Robin Callahan, who is the Vice President of Philanthropic Services at the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, where she led the recent transfer of wealth study for Pierce County. She has a wealth of information and experience in nonprofit planned giving, both as a nonprofit leader for 15 years who started a planned giving program, and also as the director of the National School Foundation Association, where she coached other nonprofits in their planned giving efforts. And finally, we have Janell Johnson, who is a philanthropic advisor with Phila Engaged Giving and a chartered advisor in philanthropy, CAP, who works with high net worth individuals and families to help them develop meaningful philanthropic endeavors that are personally fulfilling, strategic, and that speak to their values, as well as to the needs of a more inclusive, supportive, and healthy society. She is immediate past president of the Washington Planned Giving Council and has worked with the Arizona Community Foundation, Seattle Opera, and Village Theater in advancing their donor cultivation efforts through planned giving and endowment building. We're so delighted to have the three of you here today. We're just really excited to kick this off. And we're going to kick this off with Travis, who's going to begin by sharing some of the research that LOCUS has completed, and he's going to kick off the discussion today. And Travis, I hope you'll start us with really what is this transfer of wealth and why is it so critical? And what's going to happen over the next several years? Please, Travis, over to you.
Well, thank you, Karen, for having us here. Thank you, Lucinda and the Alford group for raising awareness of that important data that you shared at the beginning. I also want to thank Robin and Janell and the other practitioners that are out there, not just quantifying this opportunity, but making real this opportunity for communities, right? These numbers seem big and abstract, and it takes the hard work of development professionals to make this a reality for communities. So let's start at the really early step of what is transfer of wealth and why does it matter in our work? So the transfer of wealth, as we talk about it, just quantifies the wealth that is going to transfer from one generation to the next in a place over a period of time. And this is a simple idea that I think we started talking about quantifying at the end of the 90s. Boston College did some work to quantify this for the United States. The Center for Rural Entrepreneurship, the predecessor to my organization, really carried the mantle for almost 2 decades, and a colleague of mine, Dawn Mackey, did these studies all over the United States. And there was one foundation, the Nebraska Community Foundation, that has been doing these studies the whole time and talks about the power of using transfer of wealth analyses in communities to capture this philanthropic opportunity. And they have a great website. You should go look at it when you have a moment, but not right now. So why is this idea so compelling? Well, let me provide you one example. There's a town in Nebraska, Shickley, Nebraska, of 600 residents that has built a multi-million-dollar endowment for their community. This is not a town full of millionaires and billionaires. But they've created a culture of giving where 70 or 80% of residents in the town support philanthropic efforts, and then also make plans for end of life and giving back to the community. So what we're talking about is a really large undeveloped asset across a lot of the country. And next slide. So this idea has been compelling enough that 20 years after it really took hold, the Chronicle of Philanthropy in 2018 did a cover story about the next decade of giving, saying that in the next decade, more wealth is going to transfer from one generation to the next than has ever in US history. And the cover story was 9 trillion and counting, and the Chronicle of Philanthropy referred to this next decade as the windfall years. My predecessor, Don Mackey, likes to say, well, these aren't the windfall years unless we make them the windfall years, right? This money is going to be transferring across the United States, but unless nonprofits and community foundations and others have conversations with those families, this will be one of the largest missed opportunities in US history. Next slide. So like I mentioned, this work has been done for some time and across the country. And Don Mackey, again, my predecessor, did these studies in about 50% of the counties of the United States. They've conducted these studies. Some of these places have done multiple studies, but they all kind of tell the same story about opportunity in community. Next slide. So what makes up this substantial wealth that's transferring from one generation to the next? I think it's easy for us to immediately jump to cash, but the reality is the bulk of this wealth that is transferring is a whole host of assets that are typically invested in place and helping create strong, vibrant local economies. That includes things like small family-held businesses. That includes other financial assets, might be retirement, stocks and bonds. It includes things like life insurance policies, housing and real estate. And this is something that we talk about at LOCUS because we are talking about local impact investing. But these assets, there's a concern about potential divestment of these assets from local communities. And so it's not only how can philanthropy stimulate giving, but how can philanthropy stimulate stickiness of these assets so they stay in place, creating productive and vibrant economies. Next slide. So we have an update. The Chronicle we were talking about had 9 trillion in 2018. We've updated those figures recently, and between now and 2032, we're looking at closer to $12 trillion transferring from one generation to the next. Looking out over a full generation over the next 50 years, and these numbers are really hard to comprehend, we're talking about $100 trillion of wealth transferring in the United States. And just for context, Karen, when she was opening, was talking about all philanthropic giving being close to 450 billion in a year, right? If 10% of this 11.8 trillion was captured, we would more than double that value, right? So it's the importance of talking about this opportunity with communities. Next slide. So what does this, what are some of the key takeaways that we'd like you to have? First of all, communities have assets. I can't emphasize enough, and you probably all know this, but it's very easy for our communities to have kind of maybe the Eeyore approach to life, right? Which is we don't have much. But I think looking at these figures and realizing that you need to dream bigger is really what this is meant to stimulate. Think bigger, ask more, right? Second, that many places and households have wealth, right? This isn't just the big cities, right? We've been doing these studies in Nebraska, rural Oklahoma, and all of these communities have the capacity to give back. And as Karen said, it's not just your multi-million-dollar households. It's your teachers who've built up a lifetime of retirement savings that might want to give back to the community at the end of their life. Third, communities can capture these assets. As the Shickley story tells you, a community of 600 can build a multi-million-dollar endowment. They just need to have a plan and put it into action, right? If you're looking for other stories of success, I'm happy to share those with you. Fourth, this wealth is transferring now, right? This is the biggest opportunity the US has ever seen. But once these assets transfer, those assets are going to be a lot harder for philanthropy to develop, right? So now is the opportunity, right? Yesterday was the day to have a plan, but now is the opportunity to capture these assets for our communities. And then finally, this is not something that I need to tell you all, but we need these assets, right? The important work that the organizations on the call are doing in our communities are critical to community well-being and survival. And so I think that is mixed with this message of opportunity is this community need that is out there. I'll stop there, but Karen, that was the kind of the overview of what is transfer of wealth and what we're talking about today.
Thank you, Travis. And I know there's some questions already about different communities, and I know you've done these studies all over the country, but we're going to move to Robin now to talk a little bit about something more specific in terms of Pierce County, because Robin Callahan from the Tacoma Community Foundation was one of the recipients of this research. And Robin, I know that you have done one of these studies in Pierce County. Would like to hear you share more about what you learned from this research and how have you been able to utilize this information at your community foundation?
Well, Karen, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be on this panel today, and I'd like to thank Travis and Janell for joining me. And also to all the participants. I am passionate about the power of planned giving. I've seen its transformative power in organizations that I've been a part of. And so I'm really excited to talk about this opportunity, and more importantly, how people who have not already started a planned giving program can really think about it and talk about it, and how communities together can focus on it. So Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, we look deeply at the community to really understand both our needs and our opportunities. And that's why we hired LOCUS to study the transfer of wealth that was taking place in Pierce County over the next 50 years. So as Travis already mentioned, philanthropic giving really represents it's the greatest undeveloped financial resource that a community can really mobilize. And it's a way for neighbors to invest and realize this shared vision for the health and the future of their community. I love the story about Shipley and their shared vision for their community and what it could be, this small community. When we look at a larger area, Pierce County, we see that our household net worth is substantial, so $269 billion. And if you look at this map, you can see that the wealth across Pierce County is not equitably distributed. Many of you are not from our area, so you don't know this area. So while the yellow area does represent Tacoma, which is the third largest city in Washington, both the yellow and the green areas represented on the map are primarily rural. So these are areas where people might say, we don't have wealth here. It's all in Tacoma, or it's all in Gig Harbor, which is up in the Northwest County. And this map reminds us that wherever you are in the country, every region, every community has local wealth, which can be connected back to the community. So over the next 50 years, A remarkable transfer of wealth will take place in just Pierce County alone with 91,000 people. The estimated wealth that will transfer generations is 48.6 billion. Some of these numbers are just so hard to wrap your head around. Over 50 years, that will be 482 billion. And so research shows that most of this wealth will be passed on to our heirs. But this is the moment to raise the collective awareness as a community and also with your donors about the power of planned giving and the impact that it could potentially have. So according to Russell James, only 8% of people over 55 include nonprofits in their estate plan. And only 30% of Americans have actually made a will. So what you realize is there's this huge gap, a huge opportunity for us to really increase the awareness of the opportunity to transform communities and organizations with a planned gift. But only if there's a planned giving program in place and only if we ask our donors to think about naming us in their will. So I'd invite you to think for just a minute what it would mean for your mission if more people set aside 10% of their estates to benefit the organizations that serve the communities that they love. So this is just a statistic around Pierce County alone to just help paint a picture. But if people designated just 10% of their estates for nonprofits over the next 10 years, this would create collective endowments for nonprofits worth $4.9 billion. And over a 20-year period of time, $279 million would be available annually to sustain operating expenses or support new programs. I would say that this opportunity holds true across most communities. So one of the ways that we're collectively raising awareness across our community is through an effort called Leave 10 South Sound, whose aim is to build better communities and transform ordinary people into philanthropists by educating, inspiring, and encouraging individuals to leave 10% of their estate to charity, or frankly, any amount that feels significant to them. Leave 10 South Sound really is building a growing network of like-minded nonprofit leaders and professional advisors and individual champions who embrace this mission and are willing to spread the word to their networks and inspire others to leave 10. So I have put, I'll put a website in the link to you. Janell will actually also talk about the Leave 10 organization, of which Leave 10 South Sound is an affiliate, and the toolkits and resources that are available there. So I'm just going to stop there for a moment, Karen.
Thank you, Robin. Both you and Travis, there's going to be a theme here on 10%. And I like that. There was a comment in the chat about that too. When we think about the billions of dollars and 10% of that going to charity, it's a significant number. Well, I want to actually turn the attention now to Janell on getting some perspective from her. Janell, as I mentioned earlier, one of our key takeaways when we looked at the data from 2020 Giving USA was that, the 11 billion came from estates below $1 million, which was really an astounding data point for all of us. Many people sometimes assume that planned giving programs are only for large organizations. And this data clearly shows that many people are making planned gifts who are not necessarily the most wealthy. So I know you've worked with some small to mid-sized organizations as well as larger organizations. And I'd like to invite you now to share a little bit about how an organization can best identify their prospects for a planned gift.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, let me say thank you, Karen, for this invitation, and to Travis and Robin for your insights today and for your work in advancing the sector. I just kind of wanted to start off with some basic definitions before diving into some of the cultivation work. But I just want to start by saying the word planned giving can be intimidating to some people. When most development professionals hear the word planned giving, what often comes to mind is the CRATs and the CRUTs and the CLATs and the CLUTs, right? The charitable remainder trust, the charitable lead trust, essentially the alphabet soup of planned giving, as we jokingly say in the sector. It sounds complicated. It can be overwhelming to think about, which might even deter some organizations from even getting started with a planned giving program. And on the other side, what donors hear when they hear planned giving is, oh gosh, that sounds like something related to death and taxes. I want nothing to do with that, right? So just basically, essentially, planned giving simply refers to the legal and financial tools used in the gift planning process. And honestly, more than 85% of those planned gifts, I mentioned the charitable trust and gift annuities and things, but 85% of planned gifts actually fall into the bequest category. So bequest is, can be a simple 2-sentence statement in a will or trust directing a gift to charity. It can be, a beneficiary designation form from an IRA or a bank account. It's a pretty simple way. So it's not as hard as many organizations would think to get started. These gifts are simple to arrange. And so what I wanted to do was kind of focus on that type of gift in today's conversation. I also just wanted to say that, I mentioned the chartered advisors in philanthropy, and I also have a certification as a planned giving specialist from the American Institute for Philanthropic Studies. But I want to say that those kind of technical, experiences are not necessary to just get started and start having conversations with donors. In the classroom, I sat with estate attorneys, CPAs, financial advisors, and I thought that, coming from the community foundation world as a generalist, I'm glad to hear there might be some community foundation folks in the call. But when I made the transition into working for a charity, I thought that, some of these technical experiences were necessary in starting my new job as planned giving officer for Seattle Opera. And some of that technical knowledge did not really prepare me for the relational work that was to happen. So I just want to, put that out there for people to think about, that you can get started. You shouldn't be intimidated by the word planned giving or this work. In reality, even large organizations with budgets of $20+ million a year, like Seattle Opera or the symphony or the ballet, might only see 1 or 2 more complicated planned gifts for a year that fall outside of that request category. So let's talk a little bit about that relational work, because this is, as I said, about the relationship. Don't think about it in terms of the technical aspects. So think about your own development team and how donor relationships are managed. Who does the the cultivating and the soliciting and the stewardship work? On some teams, they're called solicitors or portfolio managers. Maybe you're a small organization with only a development director or an advancement director, or maybe you're the executive director and the sole person who's cultivating those relationships. And oftentimes we look at donors in different categories. You've got your annual fund and your major donors here and your planned giving donors here. So you might have a major donor program, but as Karen mentioned in the introduction, estate gifts come in all sizes. I've seen bequests from $500 annual donors who have left the organization $80,000, $100,000. It is not uncommon. I want to say that the average bequest right now nationally is maybe around $50,000, depending on the kind of organization. Might be higher for universities and hospitals. For the arts, I want to say it's closer to 35 to 75 maybe. But those planned gifts can be significant. I love that you referenced, Robin, Dr. Russell James from Texas Tech. He's also one of my favorites, but he talks a lot about gifts of assets. And Travis stated this, that household wealth is held in assets. So when you're having these conversations with donors, you want to think about these conversations from an asset lens. So this is just a little partnership wheel, it's called, to orient you to those donor categories that you might be thinking about. They're not traditionally categorized into those major donor annual fund buckets, but more so from a relationship perspective. Who are you engaging with and at what level? Where are the relationships? That's where these conversations need to happen. Oftentimes you can get a lot further when there is already trust embedded in the relationship. So it may not be someone who is as well versed in, you know, technical bequest language per se, but it's someone who is deeply connected to that person on the receiving end. So this partnership wheel is embedded in a document called it's a Solicitor's Bequest Toolkit that I put together for Village Theater, one of the organizations I work for. And I've shared it with Karen to send out to all of you today if it's helpful. It's just walks you through what the relationship cultivation process looks like, some introductory language that you might share in emails. How do you get those conversations started? And some things to think about as you develop these relationships. And I can't take credit for the whole thing. The Washington Plan Giving Council, of which I'm a board member, we have excellent resources on our website. And this piece was adapted from one of our presentations. So there was a lot of minds that went into putting this together. So if we can go on to the next slide, Karen. So planned giving resources, again, Robin already kind of gave you oriented you to the Leave 10 organization, which is doing fantastic work. Some of the brightest minds in planned giving have contributed to the development of this incredible toolkit and made it available to the community. While you can join Leave 10 as a nonprofit member or individual, you can also access certain things from their website without membership. And the toolkit is one of those things that's accessible. So I thought I'd just share with you just, you know, some of the things that can be accessed via this toolkit, your types of planned gifts. Again, I mentioned the alphabet soup. When you open that, again, you might want to just focus on the bequests or gifts from an IRA, things that can be done with a beneficiary designation form that you can incorporate into your plans right away. You might want to learn a little bit more about endowments. There might be donors who say, you know, I'm going to leave this really significant gift. I want to make sure that it's properly invested and protected. Your organization has $1 million budget and my gift is a quarter of the size of your annual budget. Give me some protection, right? And in that case, you might go to the Seattle Foundation or another community foundation or place to hold that money for you to show the donor that you are stewarding it according to their wishes. You might think about marketing. How do you integrate planned giving into your overall communications, your annual fund messages? There are simple ways to communicate to donors what you're doing. Many of you might send out you know, an annual request letter with a return envelope. Well, what about including some check boxes on the back of that envelope that say, would you consider leaving us in your estate plans? Or have you already left us in your estate plans? Or may we speak with you about a possible estate gift? There's lots of ways to communicate with donors, piggybacking on existing materials. Don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel. There is information on metrics. There are resources for professional advisors. Even if you don't have a sophisticated CRM where you are tracking these donor relationships, this type of work can be done on a simple Excel spreadsheet. Here are all of the people who I'd like to ask about a bequest based on that relationship wheel. Here are all of the individuals who've stated an interest or people that I might want to follow up with. And then for those folks who have indicated an interest, how do I want to engage with them every year? Many organizations have what's called a legacy society, which gives them just another kind of donor title to honor their gift. Even if they're not an annual donor, they feel like they are a part of something. And some organizations may have an annual luncheon or just a thank you letter or a special note from the executive director every year to say thank you to those donors. So I think I'll go ahead and pause it there, Karen.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Janell. I love how you you make this so approachable. I think so many times, many people think planned giving is complicated, and what you have really emphasized, it really is the relationships. And although there are all of these other vehicles around charitable remainder trusts and annuities and all of these things, still the majority of people are giving through bequests and through their IRA. And I used to say when I was in the seat of a development officer, I would say, I know just enough to be dangerous. So let me bring in the, the financial advisor and the people who really understand the legalities around more complicated. But it's good to know for people to realize that it's not the complicated planned gifts so much that we're talking about. And Robin, I know you had another slide. I wanted to just go back for a moment to maybe if you could take a minute to share what you were going to share in terms of where it's coming from. Is it mostly cash, or is it something else?
It's a great question. So I think this is a difficult slide, and I apologize because, of course, it's very hard to read. So I don't want you to focus on all the details. But I think when we say bequest and planned giving, people immediately think about cash gifts. And donors have many more assets than they may imagine, and certainly more than you may imagine. So if you're just looking at it at a high level, this is assets are on the left from $10,000 up to $1 billion. And green is the percent of assets that are held in cash at each level of net worth. And then the other colors represent all the other assets. These are sometimes called complex assets, but they range from a primary resident to stocks, to real estate, to business interests. And so complex assets are things that can be liquidated or transferred for a philanthropic purpose as a complex gift. And so if you're, to make it simple, obviously, just talking about a simple bequest is the easiest way for someone to go. But just know that if you're only talking about cash and you aren't mentioning anything else, you may be missing your donor's full potential for giving. And I think many smaller nonprofits really aren't set up to accept complex gifts. So just know that your local community foundation could potentially be a good partner for you in accepting complex gifts on your behalf.
Fantastic. Thanks, Robin. That is such good information. And even though some of these slides might be challenging to see on the screen, just to remind you, we're going to be providing you with the deck and also some tools that both Robin and Janell have provided in terms of some sample gift acceptance policies, some other kinds of policies that you'll want to put into place. There we go. So I see that it's happening in the chat as well. I want to turn this now to kind of open this up a little bit. I know this actually was a question in the chat, but it's something that we all talked about as a panel as well. We talk about transfer of wealth, and I love the 11.8 trillion. I can't quite get the T to come out, but it's so much. And if it's 10% of that, what that would mean. But I know people also think, how are people deciding about the amount that they're going to give to charities versus passing along down to their families? I mean, with the aging of the baby boomers, this is really happening. And the money is either going to go to the families or to the charities. Maybe, Janell, I think you had some thoughts about you'd worked with some families thinking about how are they deciding whether they should pass a lot of this wealth to a charity versus a family, and how are they balancing that? And maybe you could share an example that you shared with me.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think we are at a moment in history where we're thinking about wealth a little bit differently. There are inequities, disparities all around us. Families are thinking about how the wealth is being passed down from generation to generation, and if it makes sense to do that. And they're making decisions that are in alignment with their values. I've worked with clients who've said, hey, I've had this conversation with my children about how I want to support them and my personal values around philanthropy. And they know that I plan to leave a bulk of my wealth to charity and not to them. And that has opened a door to some really deep family conversations. And I've seen that both on the advising side and also on the plan giving side, working within charities where I've had, donors, arts donors say, hey, can you help me put a plan in place that will direct most of my wealth to charity? So we're hearing that more and more frequently, but it's all, values-based. It's driven by their personal kind of feelings around what's happening in the world and how they feel they can make an impact, closing the gap on inequities that they see. It's a really personal decision and conversation, which goes back to that relational piece. Who is equipped to have these conversations with people? People don't typically just share that information. It happens more in that, for folks who are CAPs on the webinar today will know what I mean when I say trusted advisor. These are things they might share with a trusted person, not necessarily with a charity. Right. So think about who's having those conversations and really understand the values of the person you're working with to help guide them in those conversations.
That's terrific. Travis, I wonder if you might want to add to that a bit in terms of from a national perspective, what you've seen both in versus rural versus urban, and how are people grappling with that issue?
Yeah, well, I'll say, and the map illustrates this. Our work has been place focused, right? So in many cases, we're working with community philanthropy that are saying, how do we develop these assets on behalf of the communities where we reside? And in that case, the strategies that the institutions are using speak to the residents' affection for place or their history or their legacy that connects them to their hometown, and makes the point that that your wealth has been part of a product of the place, and that part of making the next generation successful in that place is giving back to the community. So that is the message that has resonated with particularly community foundations across the United States, but I think it would be relevant to a lot of nonprofits as well. I mean, and the Leave 10 campaign has that. 5 for CNY, Central New York has that. A number of place-focused calls to giving have been very effective. I know Illinois is pursuing one now as well.
That's terrific. I love that term, affection for place. It's so meaningful. It really is. I have a couple more questions and we want to open it up for Q&A, but Robin, who do you think is most, have you seen trends, and who do you think are the most likely people to make a planned gift? Is it women? Is it next gen? What are some of your observations with regard to that?
Well, there's great studies around this. And so there's really not a lot of guessing. Donors with no children or close relatives are the #1 candidate for making planned gifts. And single females over 65. So also very philanthropic. Widows or widowers who have outlived a spouse, that need to care for a spouse through their lifetime often keeps people from being as generous as they can be. But once they are by themselves, then they typically find they can be more generous. And then, Janell already hit on this, but your loyal donors who have given annually, they attend events, they volunteer, they might be giving small gifts, but they've given that gift every year for 20 years. These are the people who are most likely. And then the other group, so as you're thinking through your list of donors and you're thinking about who might I talk to about this the next time we have coffee, this is the group that you would want to focus on. And then another group to cultivate are Gen X donors. So according to Generation Impact author Sharna Goldsecker, within the next 25 years, Gen X will replace baby boomers as the wealthiest generation, and millennials will hold 5 times as much wealth as they do now. And so in addition to the amount of their wealth, one of the things that we know about this group is they're not waiting until the sunset of their lives to be philanthropic. They're becoming the donors that they aspire to be and making a difference now. So I will actually put a link to the Generation Impact book in the chat, but would just encourage you to really think about this group and how you might cultivate them among your donors as well.
Oh, that's so helpful. That is such great information, Robin. Thank you. I want to actually open this up to the panel. This next question here. How can we use this information around the transfer of wealth to create a more equitable society? Is there something that all nonprofits can do around this? I'll open it up and see who would like to take a stab.
So I'd like to jump in there. So, we are continuously in my organization looking at ways that wealth can be leveraged to make our community more equitable and just. And it really shouldn't be surprising, given the multi-generational access to wealth and opportunity, that wealth is not distributed across our zip codes equitably. And so as nonprofit leaders, we need to do a good job of telling our stories about how we're addressing inequity and systemic change and invite donors in to support that through planned gifts. As community leaders, we can help other nonprofits, especially those who are under-resourced, often led by or serving BIPOC individuals. So starting a planned giving program, we can help them start a planned giving program so that they have the opportunity to capture some of this multi-generational wealth transfer. There's so many single executive directors who are working in a single staff organization who say, I know I should do this, but I have no idea how to think about the future when I'm just trying to keep my doors open today. And so the bottom line is, whether it's 5% or 10% or 1%, the idea is that rather than having it just transfer from one wealthy generation to another and further increase the wealth divide that exists, we each have a part to play in ensuring a portion of it goes to organizations whose very mission is around creating a more equitable and just society. So I'd say whether it's starting your own planned giving program or helping form a community coalition like Leave 10 South Sound, or just mentoring a nonprofit leader, I think there's a role for all of us to play.
Excellent. Wonderful. Travis?
I can provide just a quick reflection. I'll say that transfer of wealth emerged as a tool to help communities that had the perception that they didn't have wealth to give, that they actually had wealth, right? And dispelling that myth about our neighbors and ourselves was its intention as a tool. I will say that Illinois led some really interesting work, the Forefront and the Alliance, the recent transfer of wealth study we did with them, where we put race and ethnicity as factors in the study to look at how, although we don't have the wealth figures by race and ethnicity, we do have place-based figures. So we can draw connections between race and ethnicity of communities, and race and ethnicity and wealth holding. And the story is a challenging one, right? It's not, it's that wealth is concentrated in white communities. Wealth is concentrated in non-Hispanic and Latino communities. And I think more and more people are asking for that analysis as part of wealth understanding in communities, so that this isn't just development data, but that this is change data, right? How do we use this information to invest in communities and neighborhoods differently? And we did similar things in our work with Tacoma.
That is very interesting. Thank you both. That is terrific. We are getting close to the end of time. There's a question here in the Q&A. One of the questions is, what are your most successful 2 or 3 questions to invite a donor into a conversation about a planned gift? Anyone want to take a go with that? how you would, Janell.
Well, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier, keep it simple, be genuine, make sure the right person is asking the question. If you're putting the right pair together, it's going to be a natural conversation that won't feel awkward, and things will move along. So have you considered leaving a legacy? Oh, what's a legacy? What does that mean? Oh, well, that means, supporting our organization with a gift in your estate that doesn't have any financial impact on your budget right now, but it's something that you might consider in the future. It's a lovely way to send a message to your family and loved ones that you are thinking beyond, your lifetime, and engaging with the community more deeply. So something. I mean, make sure that it's authentic and that you feel it. And in the document that you'll share out with everyone, there are, I think, 7 different conversation starters to help make those introductions. Maybe it's, hey, I recently left a gift in my estate, which I think you should as a nonprofit professional, whether it's 1% of your life insurance policy or 1% of an IRA. It's always nice to lead into a conversation with, hey, this is something I just did. Can I share it with you? Or would you like to join me? So there are many ways to start a conversation, but just make sure that you're authentic and genuine.
Absolutely. Anything to add from the panel on that? Are there any other questions from the audience? We've been answering some chats as they come. Thank you, Rick, for your comment. I wish I could give more. That's a wonderful thing to hear. Love that.
One thing that I'd like to add there is that I think one of the things that that I also think is important for donors to know is, we have really valued your commitment to us, and you have been, making this contribution for years. Have you thought about what it will mean to our organization after you're gone? And so the legacy or a bequest is a way to really replace their gift. And when people come to us and they're seeking to set up a designated fund to remember a charity, that's actually what they often will comment on is, this is an organization that I know has counted on my donations over the years, and I want to continue to support them. I want them to be able to continue to count on my support even when I'm not here any longer.
Fantastic.
Along those same lines, Karen, I just wanted to briefly address Brandy's question in the chat box in terms of how to reach folks in the community and the availability of estate planning professionals. So I just wanted to reiterate that this is work that you can do on your own from within your organization. So reaching people in the community, those are your supporters. How are you getting out your message? Who are you connecting to? And then within those connections, offering the option to be included in their plans. So oftentimes it's the organization who is helping that donor reach out to their estate planning professional to let them know of their interest to leave a bequest. Very infrequently do I find those inquiries coming from estate attorneys. It's always coming from the donor to the organization. And then together, I've even sat in on meetings with donors who've wanted me to accompany them on meetings, with their estate planning professional, or maybe they're looking for a recommendation. They're just getting started and they're asking you, who should I talk to about doing this work? But just know that it usually works the other way around. It's the organization and the individual, start the conversation, and then the estate planning attorney follows.
From another, thanks, Janell. I think that's good information. And from another practical just perspective, a reminder, something that Janell said kind of triggered my thought around make sure that when people have made a commitment to you, that you treat them like a major donor. So even though it's a deferred gift, they're revocable. All of these gifts are revocable gifts. And so it's really critical that you recognize the commitment that someone makes when they make a bequest to you or make a commitment to you, and that you continue to honor and treat them in a way that's befitting of that commitment that they've made. I mean, in their lifetime, they will leave very few organizations in their will. And so when you think about the fact, who do we leave in our will? It's our children and relatives and a couple of organizations to which we hold most dear. And so you want to think about how you steward those relationships in a really meaningful way then moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you both. That is so important. And, and I think the other thing as people move, as professionals move from workplace to workplace, when that kind of information is within the organization, that records are so kept so clearly so that 10 years from now, who's ever in that seat knows that that person made that commitment and they continue to steward that person just as they would their major donors who are giving every year. Well, we're at the point where I want to invite the panel for kind of a wrap-up lightning round here. In just a few words, I want to invite you each to tell us what is the one thing nonprofits should keep top of mind as they plan for the transfer of wealth.
I'm happy to go. And it gets to the 5 points that I shared before. There's wealth in your place. It's transferring now. Act now to capture it. I mean, I don't think you need to know what these numbers are in your county or your specific neighborhood. Just know that they are larger than you would imagine and that you need to have a strategy in place to capture them. That would be my advice.
Excellent. Robin?
So, for me, I just want you to take away that it's easier than you think to start a planned giving program. You need a gift acceptance policy. You need to name your legacy society. You can call it your legacy society. And then you just want to start asking on every donation form, have you named us in your will? Would you like more information about naming us in your will? It's not more complicated than that. I had passed along a sample codicil. So just a reminder that people do not draft and redraft their wills very often. So you want to consider making a codicil available. This is one that works in the state of Washington. It's different in every state, so a codicil may not work in the state where you live, but this is an easy way for your board or other people to actually name you in their will with a witness without having to completely redraft their will. So I just want to encourage you, if you don't already have a good planned giving program in place or it's kind of gone dormant, plant the acorn today. You may never sit under the shade of that oak tree, but many years down the road, people will thank you for it, and your organization will be better as a result.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Janell, final word from you.
Of incorporating planned giving into everything that you're doing. Don't treat it as a separate program and something that sits outside of your other donor work. Give your portfolio managers, your board members, your executives, the tools and the language to join you in this work and make it a full organizational effort. So integration is key. I'd also say don't assume that your $50 donor is not a major donor, because you should be treating every single donor engagement like they are a major donor. There's potential in everyone. And then finally, just don't be afraid to ask the question. It doesn't hurt anything. I know asking people for money in general can be difficult. Asking people about their legacy plans feels a little bit different. Try it on to see what it feels like. And I think you'll be surprised at the kinds of conversations and relationships it'll lead to.
Wow, great final tips from the three of you. Absolutely. Everybody take everything they said to heart and you'll do well. I just really want to thank you, Robin, Travis, and Janell. You have been so insightful, and the information you shared is just so incredibly valuable. I'm going to turn it back to my colleague, Lucinda, who's going to close it with some resources and how to access some of the things that we referred to this afternoon.
Yeah, well, wow is all I really have to say right now. This has been fantastic. And somebody in the chat said eye-opening, and I couldn't agree more. This is just fantastic information and such a reason to get started right away. And to that end, in terms of the tools and how to get started, so everyone will receive an email from us, from the Alford group, after the webinar a little bit later today. And it will include the full recording of this session, and it will include tools and documents that were mentioned here. So we will create PDFs of those and have them posted that will hopefully be helpful in your work in either starting or enhancing your planned giving programs. Also, we will have a survey that will be in the same email. We ask you to tell us how we did today. We would love your feedback. After we conclude here, the survey will pop up on your screen. It's really short, it's 4 questions. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And then finally, if we didn't answer your question, or if you have further questions or want to continue this conversation, please reach out to us. Our email at the Alford group is info@alford.com. Pretty easy to remember. We'd love to field any other questions. And if you email us there, we can get in touch with Robin, Janell, or Travis if you have specific questions for them. And we would love to continue this conversation. So thank you so much to the panel. Thank you to everyone for joining. This concludes our session for today. We're now going to disconnect, and I hope that everyone has a really fabulous afternoon. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you all. Take care. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.